David Stevens peered out from his study window, the fog-draped hills rolling away into the distance. The serenity was perfect for his writing, but the sprawling estate demanded attention he could no longer afford to give. He needed help. The sound of a vehicle approaching stirred him from his thoughts. Through the mist, a sleek, silvery car glided to a stop outside his front door. David watched as the driver stepped out, an alien figure with luminous skin and graceful movements. He opened the door, stepping out to greet his prospective housekeeper. "Miss Annara, I presume?" "Yes, Mr. Stevens," she replied, her voice melodic, almost soothing. "Thank you for considering my application. Please, call me David." "Come in, let's talk over some coffee," he said, leading her into the house. As they walked through the grand hallway, Annara looked around with an appreciative eye. "You have a beautiful home. It feels very peaceful here." "Thank you, Annara. I do enjoy the tranquility, though it's a lot of work to maintain." They settled in the cozy kitchen, where David poured coffee for both. Sitting across from her, he noticed how her eyes sparkled with an intelligent curiosity. "So, Annara, your resume is quite impressive, but quite unusual for a housekeeper. You mentioned you've worked in diplomatic services." "Yes, David. I served as a liaison on my planet, helping to bridge cultural gaps. I believe managing a household here wouldn't be so different." David chuckled. "I suppose diplomacy is needed in both arenas. What brings you to Earth?" "Exploration. Understanding different lives," she explained. "Also, a change of pace from the politics of diplomacy. And I find human culture fascinating." David nodded, intrigued. "Well, my needs are pretty simple here. Cooking, cleaning, and maybe some help organizing my paperwork. But most importantly, someone to handle things when I'm lost in my writing." "I can certainly manage that," Annara said with a confident smile. "I'm quick to learn and adapt." "Good to hear," David replied. "I do have one more question. Have you ever dealt with, let's say, a more rural environment?" Her smile widened. "Yes, on my planet. I grew up outside a major city. I'm accustomed to the quiet and the challenges of larger estates." "That's a relief," David said, feeling a sense of ease. "If you're comfortable with the setup here, I'd like to give it a trial period." "I would appreciate that, David. I'm sure I'll fit right in." As Annara spoke, her genuine tone and calm demeanor reassured him. Maybe, just maybe, this unusual arrangement could work out. "All right then, welcome aboard, Annara." "Thank you, David. I look forward to working with you." With the agreement settled, they shook hands, not just as employer and employee, but as two individuals from vastly different worlds, about to embark on a unique journey together. Chapter 2. An Unusual Morning. David woke to a weight on his chest, a warmth unlike the usual chill of his large, empty bed. Eyes fluttering open, he was startled to find Annara perched on top of him, her gaze intent and slightly worried. His heart raced, not just from surprise, but from the close proximity to her otherworldly features, highlighted by the morning light filtering through the curtains. "Annara? What's going on?" David's voice was groggy with sleep, his mind struggling to catch up with the situation. "I sensed distress. Your emotions were turbulent, like a storm on my home planet. In my culture, we share physical closeness to calm such storms. I apologize if this is inappropriate," Annara explained, her voice steady but her eyes searching his for signs of discomfort. David took a moment to process her words, his initial shock giving way to curiosity. No, it's okay. Just a bit unexpected. I was dreaming, a bit of a nightmare, I guess." Annara slid off him, sitting beside him on the bed with her hands neatly folded in her lap. "Would you like to talk about it?" she asked, her tone gentle. "It's silly, really. I dreamt that I was lost in my own home, that it had turned into an endless maze," David shared, rubbing the back of his neck. "That doesn't sound silly. Dreams can be a reflection of our fears. And living alone in such a large place, it could feel like a maze," Anna reasoned, her analysis thoughtful. David nodded, appreciating her understanding. "Maybe you're right. It's been a lot quieter here since. Well, since I started living alone." Anna's hand reached out, hesitating for a moment before resting lightly on his arm. "If you ever feel lost, I'm here. Not just to clean or cook, but as someone you can rely on." Her touch was comforting, and David found himself grateful for her presence. "Thank you, Anna. I didn't expect you to take your job to heart like this. I believe in caring for all aspects of a home, including its inhabitants," Anna said with a smile. "Now, how about we start the morning with a good breakfast? I can make something from my world if you'd like." Curious and eager to learn more about her, David agreed. "I'd like that. And maybe you can show me a bit of your culture today." "Of course. Let's make it a day of sharing. I'll start with breakfast, and maybe later I can show you some traditional music and attire from my planet," Anna proposed, already rising from the bed with a newfound energy. David watched her move to the kitchen, her form graceful and almost floating. He felt a warmth spread through him, not just from the heat of her body that had lingered, but from the realization that perhaps his large, cold home could finally start to feel a bit warmer. As they cooked together, Anna instructed David on how to prepare a traditional breakfast porridge from her planet, made from grains and fruits David had never heard of before, all stored in her specially designed kitchen compartment. "The texture should be creamy, and we top it with a sprinkle of sweet spice," Anna explained, guiding his hand as he stirred the pot. David laughed, enjoying the process. "I must admit, this is the first time cooking has ever felt like an adventure." Anna joined in his laughter. Good food is an adventure that transcends worlds. As they sat down to eat, the unfamiliar flavors bursting with sweetness and spice, David realized that Anna was not just a housekeeper. She was a bridge to a broader, more exciting world. In her company, he felt a connection not just to her culture, but to a renewed sense of life within his own home. Chapter 3. Cultural Discoveries. Later that afternoon, Anna led David into the living room, where she had arranged an array of colorful fabrics on the couch. Each piece shimmered with intricate patterns, unlike anything David had ever seen. "What's all this?" David asked. His curiosity piqued as he picked up a fabric that seemed to change color with the light. "These are traditional garments from my planet," Anna explained, her eyes lighting up with pride. "Each pattern tells a story, much like your books." David draped the fabric over his arm, impressed. "They're beautiful. What story does this one tell?" "That is a celebration cloth, worn at the festival of the twin moons. It represents the harmony between our world's dual moons and their influence on our tides and spirits," she detailed, guiding his fingers along the embroidered moons. Fascinated, David listened as Anna described more customs and traditions. She spoke of her planet's music, dance, and even their culinary delights, which were much more diverse than the breakfast they had shared. "Would you like to try on one of the garments?" Anna asked with a playful tilt of her head. David laughed, feeling adventurous. "Why not? Which one would you recommend?" "This one," she said, handing him a robe-like garment with silver and blue swirls. "It's worn by storytellers during great gatherings." With Anna's help, David slipped into the garment, the fabric cool and smooth against his skin. He looked at himself in the mirror, amused by his reflection. "Do I look like a storyteller?" "You look like someone who appreciates new experiences," Anna corrected with a smile. Encouraged by the day's sharing, David decided to reciprocate. Let me show you something from my world, too." He led her to his study, where walls of books surrounded them. He pulled out a few of his favorites, explaining their significance and the stories behind them. Anara listened intently, her fascination evident. "Your books are like our garments, aren't they? Carriers of stories and traditions." "Exactly," David agreed. "And just like your garments, each book here tells a different story." They spent the rest of the afternoon exchanging stories and traditions, finding similarities and differences between their cultures. Anara taught David a few phrases in her language, her laughter filling the room when he tried to pronounce them. "Say it again," she encouraged after a particularly butchered attempt. David repeated the phrase, and this time it sounded almost right. "Did I get it?" "Much better," Anara applauded. "You're a quick learner." As the day turned into evening, David realized how much he had learned and shared. It wasn't just about new knowledge. It was about connecting with someone from a vastly different background in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for today," David said as they settled down with a cup of tea. "I feel like I've traveled to your world without leaving my home." Anara smiled warmly. "And I feel more at home here because of your openness and curiosity." Their day of cultural exchange ended with a plan to incorporate a piece of each other's traditions into their daily lives. Anara would cook a dish from her world once a week, and David would read a story from his collection during their shared meals. As they parted ways for the night, David felt a profound sense of gratitude. Anara wasn't just his housekeeper. She was a friend and a teacher. In sharing their cultures, they had created a new, shared space, a home that was no longer just a place, but a blend of worlds. Chapter 4. Emotional Ties. David had grown accustomed to Anara's presence in his home, finding comfort in their shared routines and nightly exchanges of stories and customs. But tonight felt different. As they walked through his garden under the silver gleam of the moon, the air between them charged with a new, unspoken connection. "Anara," David began, breaking the silence, "have you ever felt out of place on Earth?" Anara paused, turning to face him. "At times, yes. But since I've been here with you, I feel more grounded." "Why do you ask?" David hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because, despite how different our worlds are, I find myself drawn to you. Not just as a friend or housekeeper, but something more." Anara's eyes widened slightly, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "David, I have felt something similar. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to speak of it." Encouraged by her response, David took a step closer. "Nothing about our situation is what most would call appropriate by conventional standards anyway." With a gentle smile, Anara reached out, touching his arm lightly. "Then perhaps we can define what is appropriate for us." Their conversation paused as they continued to walk, now with their arms brushing occasionally. Reaching a bench, they sat side by side, the moon casting shadows around them. "Back on my planet," Anara began, breaking the silence. "When two beings feel a connection, they share a bond ceremony that involves exchanging a personal token and a kiss." David turned to her, intrigued. "A kiss?" "Yes," she replied softly. "It's a sign of deep trust and affection." Would you be open to such a tradition?" David's heart raced at the prospect. "Yes, Anara, I would." Slowly, they turned to face each other, their faces illuminated by moonlight. Anara reached up to tuck a stray lock of hair behind his ear, her touch gentle. David found himself drawn in by the beauty of her glowing eyes, and without another word, he leaned in. Their kiss was tentative at first, exploratory, but as they grew more comfortable, it deepened, both marveling at the feelings it stirred within them. When they finally parted, Anara looked into David's eyes with a new warmth. "In my culture, after such a kiss, We are considered bonded, in a way that is acknowledged by all. David smiled, his hand finding hers. Then consider us bonded, Anara. I don't need a whole world to recognize it, just you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just holding hands under the night sky. David felt a peace he hadn't known in years, a completeness that only Anara's presence could fill. I have something for you, David said suddenly, remembering the tradition she mentioned. He pulled out a small, antique watch from his pocket. This was my grandfather's. I'd like you to have it, as my token. Anara took the watch, her fingers tracing the delicate engraving. I'm honored, David. And I have something for you as well. She reached into a pouch tied at her waist and pulled out a small, smooth stone that shimmered like a star. This is a bond stone from my world. Keep it with you, as a sign of our connection. David accepted the stone, feeling its warmth in his palm. I will treasure it always. As they walked back to the house, their steps light with newfound joy, they knew that their relationship had transformed, transcending boundaries of worlds and customs. They were no longer just housekeeper and employer, or even just friends. They were partners, bonded by mutual respect, affection, and a kiss under the moonlight. Chapter 5. Closer. The morning after their bond ceremony, David and Anara found themselves navigating their new relationship with a cautious excitement. The house, with its echoing halls and vast rooms, suddenly seemed more intimate, filled with unspoken promises and shared glances. David was in the kitchen, trying to recreate the alien breakfast porridge Anara had made him weeks ago. He measured and mixed the ingredients, concentrating more than usual. Anara walked in, watching him with a smile. You look like you're handling delicate scientific equipment there, Anara teased, leaning against the doorframe. David glanced up, a playful spark in his eye. This is a delicate operation indeed. One wrong move, and the whole thing could be inedible. Anara laughed, walking over to help. Here, let me show you again. It's all in the wrist, she said, guiding his hand to stir the mixture smoothly. As their hands touched, David felt that now familiar jolt of connection. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and for a moment they both paused, the world around them fading away. Thank you, David murmured, his voice low. Not just for this, he gestured to the pot, but for everything. Anara's face softened. I should be thanking you. You've opened your home, and your heart, to me. They spent the day together, working side by side in the garden, planting new flowers that were hardy enough for the earth's soil but exotic to mirror the beauty of Anara's world. Their conversations flowed easily, from trivial day-to-day matters to deeper discussions about their hopes and fears. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat on the porch with cups of tea, watching the light fade from the sky. David turned to Anara, his expression serious. Anara, what are you afraid of? He asked, the question lingering in the quiet air between them. She pondered for a moment before responding. I fear that one day the differences between us might seem too vast, that the novelty of our bond might wear off, and the reality of our distinct worlds will pull us apart. David reached out, taking her hand in his. I understand that fear, but every day we choose to be together, to learn and to grow. That's not novelty, that's commitment. Anara squeezed his hand, reassured by his words. And I choose you, David, every day. The night grew deeper, and they moved inside, sitting by the fireplace. David brought out an old guitar, and Anara watched curiously as he tuned it. Do you play? Anara asked, intrigued. A bit, David admitted, though it's been a while. He strummed a few chords, the music rough but heartfelt. Music is a part of my world, just as it is in yours. Maybe not as integral, but it's here. Encouraged by her attentive gaze, David played a simple melody, his voice joining the guitar in a soft song. Anara listened, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, her expression one of complete focus. When he finished, Anara was silent for a moment before speaking. "Your music. It touches something within me. It's different from ours, but just as moving." David smiled, setting the guitar aside. "Maybe one day you can teach me one of your songs." "I'd like that," she said, her voice warm. As they prepared for bed later, their actions were tender, each touch and look a reaffirmation of their bond. In the quiet of the night, David felt a peace settle over him, a certainty that no matter the challenges, they would face them together. Chapter 6. The Bond. In the weeks that followed, David and Anara's bond only grew stronger. Their routine now included long evening walks, during which they planned the future and discussed their day. The initial awkwardness of their new relationship had faded, leaving a comfortable companionship. One crisp evening, as they walked through the garden, David broached a topic that had been on his mind. "Anara, I've been thinking about how we can integrate more of your culture here. Maybe start a small gallery in the house, showcasing art from your world." Anara's face lit up at the idea. "That sounds wonderful, David. Art is a significant part of my culture. It's how we preserve our history and share our emotions." "Exactly," David agreed. "And I think it would help you feel more at home here." They spent the next few days transforming one of the spare rooms into a gallery. David watched as Anara carefully arranged the artifacts and artworks she had brought from her planet. Each piece was accompanied by a story, which Anara shared with David, allowing him a deeper understanding of her world. As they worked, their conversation turned to more personal topics. David found himself sharing more about his past, about the loneliness he had felt before Anara's arrival. Anara listened, her presence a comforting constant. "It's strange," David said one afternoon as they hung a particularly vibrant painting, "how much fuller my life feels now. It's as if I was waiting for someone to share it with." "I feel the same," Anara replied, stepping back to admire their work. "Back home, I was respected but always felt a bit distant from others. Here with you, I feel truly connected." Their project completed, they decided to host a small gathering to unveil the gallery. David invited a few close friends and neighbors, hoping to bridge the gap between his old life and his new one with Anara. The evening of the gathering, David felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. As guests began to arrive, he watched Anara explain her culture and art with a grace and eloquence that filled him with pride. One of the guests, an old friend of David's named Michael, pulled him aside. "She's remarkable, David. You've found something special, haven't you?" David smiled, his eyes tracking Anara as she animatedly discussed a painting. "Yes, I really have." The evening was a success, with guests leaving with a greater appreciation of Anara's world. After the last guest had left, David and Anara sat together in the gallery, surrounded by the art that now adorned the walls. "This feels right," Anara said, leaning her head on David's shoulder. "Sharing my culture like this, it makes me feel like I'm truly part of this world." David wrapped his arm around her. "You are part of this world, Anara, and part of my life in a way I never expected." They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the significance of the night. Then David spoke, his voice soft but firm. "I want to explore more, not just your culture but everything with you. Whatever the future holds, I want to face it with you." Anara turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the soft gallery lights. "And I with you, David. No matter what comes, we have each other." Their promise to each other was simple yet profound. In a world that could sometimes seem overwhelmingly large and impersonal, they had found a rare connection. Together, They looked forward to a future filled with shared experiences and the blending of their worlds, confident in their bond and the love that had grown between them. Chapter 7. Confronting Challenges. As the days grew shorter and the leaves began to turn, David and Anara settled comfortably into their intertwined lives. However, the harmony they had cultivated was soon to be tested. One chilly afternoon, as they returned from a walk, they found a small group of locals gathered outside their gate. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unease. David tightened his grip on Anara's hand as they approached. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. A man from the village, Tom, stepped forward. "We're concerned, David. You've been a part of this community for years, but bringing, well, her kind here, it's not right." Anara's gaze remained steady, though David felt her hand tremble slightly. "My kind? You mean an alien? I assure you, I mean no harm to your community." Tom shook his head. "It's not just about harm. It's about what's normal, what's acceptable. People are worried. It's not every day we have someone like you living next door." David's jaw set. "Anara is here as my guest, and she has as much right to be here as anyone. She's brought nothing but good to our home, and can do the same for this community if you give her a chance." The conversation attracted more onlookers, whispers circulating among the small crowd. David could feel the weight of their stares, their suspicion. But he stood tall, his stance protective beside Anara. "Why don't you come in?" David suggested. "See the gallery we've set up. Learn about Anara's culture. Maybe understanding more will ease your concerns." There was a pause, the group exchanging uncertain glances. Finally, Tom nodded. "All right, we'll come in. But this doesn't mean everything's settled." David led the way, Anara squeezing his hand in silent gratitude. As they entered the gallery, Anara took the lead, her voice clear and welcoming as she explained the different artifacts and artworks, each piece a story from her world. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted. Curiosity began to replace suspicion, questions were asked, and discussions ensued. Anara's explanations painted a picture of a culture rich in tradition and knowledge, not so alien after all. After the tour, as the group gathered in the living room for tea, a different Tom spoke up. "I must admit I didn't expect. Well, it's quite something, all of this. You've got a whole world in here." Anara smiled, her earlier tension eased. "Thank you, Tom. I hope it helps bring some understanding between us." "It does," he admitted. "Maybe we were quick to judge. It's easy to fear what you don't know." The meeting ended on a cautiously positive note, with some guests lingering to ask Anara more questions, their tones now respectful and genuinely interested. After everyone had left, David turned to Anara, his expression thoughtful. "I think that went well, considering." Anara nodded, her relief palpable. "It did. Thank you, David, for standing by me." "That's what partners do," David replied, his voice warm. "We face things together, no matter what." That night, as they cleaned up, David realized how deeply intertwined their lives had become. They were more than just housemates or even friends. They were partners in the truest sense, facing the world with a united front. Their shared experiences, both the joys and the challenges, had woven a tapestry richer than either could have imagined alone. In each other, they had found not only love, but a formidable ally against the myriad complexities of a world that often feared the unknown. Chapter 8. A United Future. In the months that followed, David and Anara became pillars of their small community, bridging the gap between human and alien interactions through openness and shared experiences. Their home, once a quiet sanctuary for David alone, had transformed into a vibrant hub of cultural exchange. One sunny afternoon, they stood side by side in their gallery, arranging new pieces Anara had created, inspired by her life on Earth. The doorbell rang, and David went to answer it, finding a young couple from the village, their faces bright with curiosity. "Hello, David. We heard about your gallery from Tom," the woman said, her eyes wide as she peered around him. "We were wondering if we might have a look." "Of course. Anara was just setting up some new pieces." "Come in." David welcomed them warmly, leading them to the gallery where Anara awaited. "Welcome." Anara greeted them with a genuine smile. "I'm glad to see new faces interested in our little cultural corner." The couple wandered through the gallery, captivated by the artwork and artifacts that Anara explained represented not only her planet but her experiences on Earth as well. The integration of elements from both worlds created a rich tapestry that visibly impressed the visitors. As they toured, the man, named Eric, turned to David. "You know, we've been talking about setting up a community center in the village where people can learn about different cultures, earthly and beyond. We think it could really benefit from your experiences." David looked at Anara, who nodded enthusiastically. "We'd love to be involved. Sharing what we've learned about each other's worlds has made a significant difference in our lives. We believe it can do the same for others." "Great." Eric's wife, Julia, chimed in. "We could use your help planning activities and educational programs. What do you think about a monthly cultural exchange night?" Anara clapped her hands together in delight. "That sounds wonderful. We could start with art and music, but maybe include cooking classes, language sessions, and storytelling from various cultures." The planning session that followed was filled with ideas and laughter, marking the beginning of a new chapter for the community. As the couple left, promising to return with more people interested in participating, David and Anara looked at each other, a sense of accomplishment filling the room. Later that evening, they sat in their garden, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves above. David took Anara's hand, feeling the now familiar contours of her fingers. "Think of how far we've come," he mused. "From that first morning you woke me up to now." Anara laughed, the sound as melodic as the first day they met. "I was on top of you when you woke up, and your reaction left you speechless, didn't it?" "It certainly did," David agreed, his heart full. "But it was the beginning of everything we have now." As the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, David and Anara planned future events and workshops for their community. They talked late into the night, their voices a testament to the power of understanding and acceptance. Their journey had taught them that fear and suspicion could be overcome with patience and effort, and that love could bridge even the vastest of cultural divides. Together, they looked forward to a future where their home continued to be a meeting place for those seeking knowledge and kinship, regardless of their origins. With Anara by his side, David no longer felt the isolation of his old life, but the vibrant connection to a world enriched by diversity and unity. In her, he had found not only a partner but a fellow architect of a shared future, promising a legacy of inclusivity and understanding that would resonate beyond the walls of their home, out into the wider world.